So, welcome again. I'd like to begin with Psalm 25. I misspoke. I meant Psalm 95. Here we go. Oh, come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come into his presence with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise to him with songs of praise. For the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods. In his hands are the depths of the earth. The heights of the mountains are his also. The sea is his, for he made it, and the dry land which his hands have formed. O come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. Let's begin with prayer. To God, we do come with thanksgiving for many, many things as we begin this service today, but I'm particularly thankful for those who are bringing us new knowledge of our past. I think of the two Rons, Ron Graybill and Ron Numbers, Jonathan Butler, Gregory Schneider, Doug Morgan, but also those who study with George Knight, Julius Naum, and Gil Valentine, and Ted Lefterov, and others. We are grateful to them for helping us to understand our past more fully. Sometimes this pleases us, sometimes this displeases us. Sometimes it amuses us, sometimes it perplexes us, but it's all to the good because we are more able to see the future as we understand the past. So help us to learn from Ron again this morning as we have in previous occasions. In Christ's name, amen. Over to you, Ron Graybill.
Well, it's just amazing. I've been starting to revive my list of Zoom meetings and send it out and everything. And then I discovered I didn't actually have the link to this meeting. So I was just scrambling around trying to find out. And 4 minutes before I was supposed to be on, I sent a message to my 350 friends that get my list. And what do you know? I got a link from Jillian Ford, of all people, and now I'm here in time. My goodness. Okay, well, listen. May
I interrupt you? Didn't you get one? Aren't you on the mailing list?
I don't know. Somehow I couldn't find it. I scrambled everywhere, you know. And
well, thanks to Jillian Ford that you're here.
Yeah, well, so it goes. Now, listen.
I've just unmuted because you're very fortunate because it's 3:30 in the morning and I happen to be up.
Yeah.
I now mute.
and she saw the email. Okay, so listen, I need to share my screen. If I can find my program here.
While you're doing that, thank you, Jillian.
Yeah, let's see. And then we want to go to view, which is no, we want to go to slideshow from the beginning. Okay, now you can see that?
Yes.
Okay, so I've called this Ellen White by Hand, the secrets of Ellen White's handwritten documents and diaries. And I'm going to begin with my conclusion. So that after this, you don't need to listen if you want to go get breakfast. But anyway, my conclusion is this, that all of Ellen White's handwritten documents, which are technically called holographs, all of those should be scanned in high resolution color, because sometimes she used different colors of ink for different amendments and so on. And they should be placed on the computers at all the branch offices and research centers of the Ellen White estate. Now, the White estate says you can examine them. Yeah, if you have the money to fly to Silver Spring and rent a hotel, and if you get approved to go in and examine them, but they need to be more readily available. I think eventually they may be even more readily available than that. But that's where I'm going to end up at the end of this presentation. So let's look at some of these and see what we can learn from the handwritten documents that Ellen White created. The earliest letter we have is this 1847 letter to Joseph Bates when Ellen was 19 years old. And in spite of a very limited formal education, she seems to have a very good handwriting, especially in a letter like this, where she's writing to an important person and taking care to be neat. And of course, you see some of the characteristics of her fancy handwriting, where she has this this elaborate curved T bars and final T bars, and even this G down here, you see I have an extra flourish on it. So this is characteristic of her good writing. In fact, at one time I thought maybe this must have been written by somebody else copying, but later on I see these characteristics. For instance, in 59, here's a letter to her son Henry, and you see she's put this fancy extra twist on the Y, and down here she begins an H with a long flourish. Here again we see her long T bars. These are not floating. We'll look at that later. This letter was kind of interesting to me in manuscript 2 of 1863. She says that a woman may be legally divorced from her husband but by the laws of the land, but yet not divorced in the sight of God. So my mother divorced my father and had Bible grounds, but then she married a man who didn't have Bible grounds for his divorce, and she was disfellowshipped from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So she waited a little while, and then she actually got rebaptized and joined the church again, and kept her second husband too. So, you know, there's different ways to do it. But here we have the fancy T-bar on adultery. That was a special word in this letter. Later in 1867, she made this statement: "My views were written independent of the books and opinions of others." Not quite an accurate statement, but this appeared in this was published in the review in 1959. So that's another one. Now, I have written a good deal about Ellen White's texts in this book recently published by Oak and Acorn, and even in Spanish, Visions and Revisions, a textual history of Ellen White's writings. Okay, now this is an interesting puzzle to me. This is a letter in her, certainly the one on the left is in her handwriting. And it's a letter to her sister Elizabeth, her twin sister Elizabeth. She's traveling across the country en route to California and describing what she saw and what happened and everything. But this one is also the same letter, and I am just not sure. There are characteristics of this letter on the right that still look like her handwriting, and yet it's a good deal neater than the one on the left. Maybe she thought, well, I want to give my sister the very best of my handwriting, and so she copied her own letter in a neater form. I don't know. Now, this letter, of course, here I says manuscript 38, 1896. As you know, the corrected official copies of Ellen White's letters, the edited copies that after her literary assistants worked on, those are all online at egwwritings.org. And in the manuscript that represents this particular handwritten letter, it is said that it was published in its entirety in HM 11, 1897. HM is the Home Missionary. But if you look at the Home Missionary text and you compare it with the text online, you find that there are variations in it. So sometimes you have a handwritten, then you have the typescript that her literary assistants have prepared, which she approved, and that was sent off to the editors of a journal, and maybe the journal editors edited it a little bit for publication in that journal. But we have these many diary books, these many journal books, and full of Ellen White's handwriting as well. Now, the letters that got me in trouble at the White Estate were the ones that Ellen White wrote to her good close friend Lucinda Hall. And those were discovered back in 1973. This one, for instance, was written about 100 years earlier to Lucinda. And Lucinda, being a good friend of both James and Ellen White was very candid in what she wrote to Lucinda. And I then was finishing my dissertation at Hopkins, and I was rushing to get done, and I wanted to include a statement from one of those Lucinda Hall letters, but there wasn't time to get it released. I didn't want to go through that, so I put it in my dissertation, even though it wasn't officially released by the White Estate. And I put a hold on my dissertation, so Hopkins was not supposed to release it, and University Microfilms was not supposed to release it. But they did release it, and then it got out. And then I was in trouble because here I had used an unreleased Ellen White statement. Well, what was the statement that was so problematic? In this letter of 1876, James and Ellen White are having trouble. And James has written this statement to Ellen White. He wrote to his wife, I shall use the good old head God gave me until he reveals that I am wrong. Your head won't fit my shoulders. Keep it where it belongs, and I'll try to honor God by using my own. Oh my goodness. It was never supposed to be known that James and Ellen White had a bit of friction between them, but there it was in my dissertation, and it got out to the world, and I was in trouble. And I eventually got dismissed from the White Estate. But I want to take a little excursion here to suggest that my dismissal from the White Estate was not simply because of this violation of policy. This gave a technical, legal reason, but there was more problems. For instance, I had written an essay questioning the authenticity of the story about Ellen White holding the Big Bible. And that was a favorite of Arthur White's. Here's a picture of him at a camp meeting, you know. And so I had written this paper. And of course, the Big Bible is always a high point of the young people's visits to the White Estate. My paper, which was not published at the time, has recently been revised and published in Spectrum. The Big Bible, bigger still, in 2015, didn't cause a stir from the White Estate or anybody else, as far as I know. But anyway, when Arthur White got a hold of my original paper, he wrote a paper against me and against my argument. And he quoted, look what he quoted. There is in our world a spirit of belief and also a spirit of unbelief. In the latter days, some shall depart from the faith. And that was pointed at me. And so at the end of his paper in 1979, he said, this statement has been prepared to provide a permanent record in the regard to the Big Bible and its use. Oh, unfortunately, he didn't calculate that Spectrum would still be going this many years later and would publish a more permanent record. So anyway, I had titled my another paper I wrote, Salamanca, the Backdated Vision. And this one also caused a great rift between Arthur White and me. He wrote a response paper, The Challenge of Faith, The Challenge of a Faith Confirming Story, the Salamanca Vision. And in that, he had this statement, yet the individual, that's me, ready to catch at anything which might call in question or discredit Ellen White's integrity or work, feels that he may have found in such records evidence of conniving and dishonesty. He is greatly disturbed at what he terms backdating, overlooking other positive considerations as character and known integrity, veracity, and even the testimony of multiple eyewitnesses, attributes to all concerned, dishonest motives and actions. And he concludes this paper, this should close the matter of the credibility of Ellen White and those who have presented the story down through the years. That's the story of Salamanca. So with that kind of problem between Arthur White and me, the White Estate was no longer an appropriate place for me to be, and I was dismissed. Again, more recently in Adventist Today, I published a mature version of my story of the Salamanca Vision, and you can read it there. I'm going to skip that.
Ron, could I interrupt just for a second? Could you give us a maybe 1 minute summary of this issue, the Salamanca Vision?
Okay, well, let me go back because I have slides here that will show. Okay, here was the problem. Mrs. White was in Salamanca, New York in November of 1890. And she later inserted in her diary this page, which you see on the left. And she put the date line, Salamanca, November 3, 1890, and she even added a letter written from Salamanca. And this document in her diary, in her 1890 diary, includes a description of a meeting which did not take place until March of the following year. So I say this is backdated because, and when you look at the diary, you can see it has been inserted in pages that were earlier left blank. And it's written in and around and over and under things that had been actually written in the diary back in 1890. So by writing something in 1891 and dating it as though it was written in November 3, 1890, that's what I call backdating. And let me show you another document, even online. This is an interesting anomaly. Here's another page, the date line, Salamanca, November 3, 1890. But when that was transcribed and placed online, that date line is no longer listed as a date line. The wording is this: at Salamanca, November 3, while bowed in earnest prayer, I seem to be lost to everything around me. Oddly, though, in the heading online, it dates that March 1891. So even the White Estate official website recognizes that this document, dated November 3, 1890, was actually written in March of 1891, and that accepts my argument that that particular thing was backdated. Now, you'll have to read the whole story to see how I handle the matter. And okay, so that's that part. Now, getting to the final little kind of a fun incident that involved my departure from the White Estate. You know, when I was at the seminary, we lived in a big white, we were all unmarried. These 5 guys were unmarried. We lived in a big white house that belonged to Clara Luke in Berrien Springs. Gordon Beats was there and Chuck Scriven. And after we left, we started what we called the White House letter. And we would write a round robin letter, and I would send it off to the next one. And in about a year, my copy would come back. I would take mine out and write a new installment. And these fellows wrote about everything, and it was only for us 5. We didn't circulate it to anybody else. One fellow wrote about how he got a vasectomy and then was trying to get it reversed. So, you know, right after Glacier View, in my letter, I said, well, you know, the Glacier View folks came up with a consensus statement. I think the liberals agreed with it, even though the liberals signed off on it, even though they didn't fully agree, and the conservatives signed off on it, even though they didn't fully agree. Well, that letter, my copy of the White House letter, before I mailed it, was laying on my desk at the General Conference. This is the old General Conference building in Tacoma Park. And our White Estate offices were inside this oldest General Conference building. It was actually encased in this one and down in the basement there. And on my desk was this White House letter where I said that the liberals and conservatives didn't really fully agree with the consensus statement at Glacier View. Well, Don Mansell came into my office when I wasn't there. He saw the letter. He started reading it. Wow. He took it. He photocopied it. He gave a copy to Arthur White. Arthur White thought I had sent such a letter out to all over the world, you know. and that I was being disloyal to the church and everything. So the night before the meeting where I was fired by the White Estate, I get a call from the wife of one of the board members. And she says, "Do you know what Arthur White is doing? He's driving around to all the board members, giving them a letter that you sent out where you criticized the folks at Glacier View." So here was Arthur White taking a letter that was stolen from my desk, and he was distributing to the board members the night before my meeting to be fired, and firing me for using an unreleased Ellen White letter. He was distributing a thing. Okay, I'm getting too excited about this. It's just fun to remember now. Now, in my defense, in Adventist Today, Richard Coffin was writing about the Glacier View, the most important event in Adventist history. Here's what he said: "Because these were consensus statements, it doesn't follow that every attendee agreed with the viewpoints buttressed therein. Agreeing to the statements of consensus didn't mean agreeing with them." That's all I said. And of course, Coffin got in no trouble for saying that. Okay, let's go on now and finish this. Here's an 1876 letter to her husband. It is pretty clear to me. I suppose if a person who was not familiar with her handwriting looked at this, they might have trouble with some words. Then in, when was it? Recently anyway, this 1882 letter was discovered at Pacific Union College. Now I want you to notice something, because we're going to have a little fun with this too. In this letter, notice these long floating T-bars. The people who do graphal analysis think there's some significance to those. So let's have a look. Oh, before we get to that, I want to mention one more reason why I think we ought to look at the handwritten originals. They ought to be available for anyone who wants to study them to look at them. This letter, 16 from 1882, written to Mary White by Ellen White, was written in 1882. It was typed up from the handwriting in 1955 under Arthur White's supervision. And in 1955, when this was typed up, this sentence was completely left out. "If you can get a few cans of good oysters, get them." That was left out of the typescript in 1955 with no ellipses. Now, you know, for a documentary editor, that is unforgivable. That creates a false document. Okay, so that letter, that typescript of letter 16, 1882, remained in the White Estate files from 1955 till 1975. By 1975, Alta Robinson and I were exercised about this, and we waited on Arthur White, and we persuaded him to retype that letter and replace the oysters. And I've written a paper about clean and unclean meat and how that fits into that, and so on and so forth. But if Arthur White in 1955 could leave something out without ellipses when he had these things typed, then I want to be able to see all of them. I doubt that there's any other cases like that, but we need to be able to see the originals. Now, Marion Davis, of course, was one of Ellen White's chief literary assistants and secretaries and so on. And she transcribed this letter. But by the way, this letter shows something interesting. First of all, Mrs. White wrote this by hand. Then she herself went back either immediately or sometime later, and she amended it. She added things. See, all the stuff that she's written in between the lines and so on. So Mrs. White edits her stuff, her handwritten stuff, even before or perhaps even after the secretary works on it. So I made a literal typescript of this, the handwriting, and then I marked it up to show you just what Marion Davis did in terms of moving things around to edit this to come up with what is on file as the official transcript of that letter. So here's the way it goes. The author writes in handwriting. That goes to her editor, the literary assistants. They create a typescript. They give the typescript back to the author, Ellen White, for her approval. She signs off on the typescript. And then the typescript might go to the publisher. Selections and arrangements are, well, wait a minute. The typescript might be used in putting together a book. So there's selections and arrangements made for the book, and then the book is published. But even this is not complete, because as I've shown you, after Ellen White wrote the initial handwritten draft, she herself edited her handwriting. And that might be before or after the editor had created the typescript. And then after the typescript was approved, she would go back into the typescript and put handwritten notes on the typescript. So there are various steps to this process, which makes for some fascinating study for a person interested in documentary editing. In April of 2006, April 15, 2006, Mrs. White spoke at the dedication of the Loma Linda Sanitarium. The next night, she had a vision in which she saw an earthquake. The next day, on April 18, the San Francisco earthquake struck. And then on May 24, she published this article. And in this case, we don't have any handwritten record. That I wish we had a handwritten record that we could actually date to April 17, so that we could show that she actually wrote immediately after she got up in the morning, wrote about the earthquake that didn't happen until the next day. But here is the so that there's no handwritten document that would call in question this incident. The 1892 diary, just a sample here with the long T bars. And then let's look closely at some of the items here. Her initial A's are sometimes not quite closed, and the internal lowercase a's are often not closed. So in this word changed, you can tell it's changed by the context, but that looks like a U to me. But sometimes, as in salvation, the A is closed. Here's some examples of her handwriting. The final Y in the word way, that doesn't look much like a Y. The final G in blending looks like the same as her Y, but in other cases it's more clear. Here's the word of. Here's the initial F in forget or forgot or for. There's no loops to it. If you compare the capital J and the capital I, here's Jordan, and here's Israel. You can hardly tell the difference between a capital I and a capital J. Capital T, well, it's a little squashed together. The initial and final P, that could look like an F. The word they often appears as thy. Here we go. That word is they. The letter X appears as SC. That's the word mix. Numbers are pretty clear. A short backslash generally was used to dot an I. And so let's move on. Here's a very late 1906 handwritten diary. And again, you see now this one is in blue. Now she might write in blue, and then she might edit this passage in black ink. So that's why I want to color scans of these documents so we can see that difference. Then in 1910, we have this that appeared in the Review and Herald in 1978. And in the caption to this, it says, Ellen White's autograph copies are available for our inspection. Yes, as I said, if you want to buy the train ticket to Silver Spring and get approval, you're able to view the autograph copies. Now, for a little fun, let's look at what the graphology says about Ellen White's floating T's. Using graphology, we can identify people who think they are superior to others. According to handwriting analysis, the T-bars in their handwriting are above the stem, which reflects their detachment from reality and shows their false sense of superiority. Also, such writers set unachievable goals in life and can achieve them only in their imagination. They derive a sense of superiority about themselves by exhibiting that their plans are far more elaborate than those of others. Oh, well, I hate to disappoint you, Ellen White critics, but graphology, there is no scientific evidence exists to support graphology, and it is generally considered a pseudoscience or scientifically questionable practice. So don't try to get anything out of my handwriting about my personality or Ellen White's. Now, I must say, in spite of my complaints about not being able to readily access all the handwritten material, our access to Ellen White and her writing and her teaching is so marvelous today, as opposed to the time even when I first went to the White Estate, when all we had was a card index to the letters and manuscripts typed many, many years ago. At EGW, at ellenwhite.org or egwhitewritings.org, I guess it's better at egwhitewritings.org, you can go to all of her letters and manuscripts. You could isolate on the letters or isolate on the manuscripts, isolate on the year, isolate on a particular letter. And you can search for certain phrases and certain periods and or certain words, and you can quickly get some Adventist researcher who hasn't been in the field for a long time and just recently got back in. He wrote to me and he said, Ron, if you have time, could you check Spiritual Gifts Volume 1 and see how many times Mrs. White uses the expression "I saw"? So I just went here. I brought up Spiritual Gifts Volume 1. I searched for "I saw," and about 20 minutes later, he wanted I was shown also. About 20 minutes later, I wrote back to him. I had all the statistics. He was utterly amazed. He didn't know you could even do this, but it is so helpful. Now, back in 2014, we got the first volume of the annotated letters and manuscripts of Ellen White, but they based their text on the typescripts, not on the handwritten material. And here it is. Here it is many years later, and we haven't got the second volume of that. They should move forward with that. So here's what I would like to see happen. I don't know if it ever will. Anyway, we should scan all the holographic documents and diaries in high resolution color. And man, I bought one of these scanners now. This scanner that I have, you can open a book here and it will even, the book will be sort of curved. It will even, the software that comes with it will even flatten the curve in the book and so on. So this could easily be done. And they'll place these scans on computers in the 4 White Estate branch offices and the 19 research centers around the world. And then recruit and train volunteers to create new literal transcriptions to meet the highest standards of documentary editing, and display each holograph and its literal transcription side by side. There's a whole discipline for documentary editing and association. They have annual meetings. There's a guide for documentary editing. There's journals about documentary editing. In fact, in 1991, I wrote an article for the journal Documentary Editing called "The Meaning of Misspelled Words" about Ellen White's handwriting and how it was being handled. So this is the way I prepare, and I work with my good conservative friend Kevin Morgan on this. He checks my work and I check his work. This is the way I prepare a literal transcription of a handwritten document. Wherever something is of the line, we put it up here like this. The cancellations, we use just cancellations. And we pass it back and forth so that we get it just as accurate as possible. And if you were reading this, handwriting and found any difficulty, you could just look over here and see what those of us who are more experienced at this think it should say. So that's my talk. Here's where the branch offices are. I was going to bring this map up and put a bunch of stars all over the United States, of other places where I think maybe all the Adventist college libraries ought to have it too. I haven't thought about that, but anyway, there it is. So have at me. I will stop my sharing now, and we can talk about this or other issues involving Ellen White, the White Estate, and our life together.
Thank you, Ron. I think you've been just a little bit too dismissive of graphology.
Oh, maybe you do.
We've got a little time here. Let's take a break now. And then when I come back, let's put up one of those videos on graphology that I found. Because it's interesting. You have those really sharp cues, right? That some cues where the line comes down and there's hardly any space between where it goes down, where it goes up. That shows a very closed-minded person.
Okay, folks, you can look at this stuff, but do your own research on graphology. Analyze your own writing and see if you think the graphologist would be right about you.
Okay.
So what do? We take a break now?
Let's do. And then Michael Shermer, let me just say this. Michael Shermer has a couple of videos online too, in which he tests this out with remarkable results. So well, he's of course a skeptic of it. So, but he gives a graphologist one person's writing when in fact it was somebody else's. So let's take a break and come back. There's a lot going on here, both with respect to the issues at hand, but also with respect to how we understand God's activity in all of this. And I have a suggestion along those lines I'd like to make. But let's take a break, 10 minutes or so. It's about 11:10 here in California, about 11:20. Is that okay?
Okay.
And Dave, I will be back. I'll take a 5-minute break, be back at 11:15 to write down names for people who want to be in the queue.
Okay, so either raise your hands or by voice indicate what your interests are. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm back and I see that George, I'm gonna put George on my list.
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, Ron is back. I put something up here, Ron, that I put on Facebook earlier this week, but then I took it down because I thought it was too whimsical. But maybe we can see it. We have a little time. This is an 8-minute clip. We don't need to see the whole of it, maybe 4 minutes of it, to get the idea of how seriously some people take graphology. In fact, some headhunters, quote unquote, people who look for executives and so forth for corporations to hire, they'll use graphology as a way of evaluating potential employees, which is sort of spooky, I think. But here, if I can bring it up, here's the video. I'm not sure that I can, but I'll try.
And I want to show you some really cool things that you can learn about other people from their handwriting almost instantly. And believe me, it really does work. In fact, University of Heidelberg, the Sorbonne in Paris, around the world, handwriting has been verified empirically through thousands of samples as being absolutely indicative as to what the personality is. So you can take this stuff to the bank. Let me show you a couple of quick things. Believe it or not, you already intuitively know a lot about handwriting analysis without being taught. For example, let's look at 3 quick samples here. We'll look at A and B for 3 different words or names. Here we have Mike and we have Mike. Which Mike is the more aggressive one or feeling more angry and aggressive? I bet you picked A. Angles show aggression, angles show energy. And with the amount of pressure put on the chalk here, this is an angry, aggressive, forward-moving person. And this person is much more relaxed and laid back. What about the second example? Hello. The question is, which one is feeling optimistic and which one is feeling pessimistic? Or which one is up and which one is down, to make it even simpler? If you pick that B is the more optimistic, you're correct, because the upward slope to the writing is a clear sign of optimism and positive attitude at that time, where the way this word drops is an indicator of feeling down or depressed at that moment. And what about the third one, A or B? What and what? The question is, which person is holding their emotions back and which is more outgoing and leaning towards other people? Well, A is holding the emotions back. The back-slanted writer pulls their emotions back from other people as a protection. In fact, if the writing is severely back-slanted, you're dealing with damaged goods. The person has probably had something severe or unsettling happen in their past at some point. Whereas this has a natural forward slant to the writing and indicates someone who is much more open and outgoing and leaning towards other people. But there's way more than that. A knowledge of graphology, real graphological principles, can make you seem like a psychic to people. I do graphology lectures throughout the university and college circuit, and it always blows people's minds. Students hang around for an hour afterwards to have me look at their writing, and they think I can read their minds. They say, how could you possibly know that about me? Let me give you a couple of examples here. The small letter T. Do you know how high you put the bar, how tall you make the T, and how high you put the crossbar in your T? Tells all kinds of stuff about you. Look, let's take a word like tell. This is someone who has good self-esteem, and they're optimistic as well. How do I know that? Because the bar on the T is higher than that letter E, and it goes up on a slight angle as well. Remember, the up slant is optimism. And the fact that the bar is high, this shows how high you set your crossbar in life that you jump over. People with distant goals, long, powerful strength of will to get there, are the Donald Trumps of the world. And you can believe me, they have T-bars that are set extremely high and long and aggressively, because they are reaching for the goal. The alternative is also true, unfortunately, which is a T-bar that's very low. T-bar that's low like this, and in this case, it's lower than the letter E. This is not only someone who underestimates their own abilities, but someone who does not believe in themselves. This is the person with low self-esteem. And if you add to this a downward slant to the writing and put the two together, you say, here's somebody with low self-esteem who's depressed as well. And so you just glance at the writing and you see low T-bars and a downward slope, and you instantly know that this person, no matter how they present themselves to you, are going through something that is making them feel down about themselves. Lack of confidence is showing, and they're maybe getting depressed as well. Powerful, powerful stuff. Let me show you a couple more. Here's some really cool stuff. And believe me, you're going to think, how can that possibly be true? Now realize this comes from thousands and thousands of samples. Scientists, information scientists, sociologists, graphologists have looked at thousands of samples to come to these conclusions. Let's look at 10,000 alcoholics and see what their writing has in common. Let's look at 10,000 people who are high achievers and see what their writing has in common. It's done through large numbers, the same as any science. And can we then make predictions based on what we know? And the answer is yes. So here's some stuff that is wacky, but you'll like it. Lower zones. Now, lower zones are where loops go down below the letter. So we have a letter like a G. There's the body of the letter, but there's a loop that goes down and comes back and crosses this imaginary baseline that the letter's sitting on. Do you know the size of that loop tells us all kinds of stuff about you? The bigger the loop, the larger number of friends you need. So a loop like this that's really big, this person needs way more friends than this person. And this person, if that's a G, doesn't really need any close friends at all. This person would have one close friend or maybe none. And this person can go it alone when they have to. If they're stuck in a cabin with a handful of books and nobody's around and they're in a snowstorm, they'll be okay. This person will go nuts, to use the medical term. They need people around them. Also, the size of the lower loop shows your sexual appetites. These big, huge lower loops mean a strong, healthy sexual appetite and a desire for things, money and stuff, and even food in some cases. But what if the loops go weird like this? That's not a loop at all, and that's a G. Now notice, in order for this to be the actual trait, there must be a point, and it must go lashing back to the left. This is what graphologists call the Felons Claw. the Felons Claw appears in something like 80% of the handwriting of people in the American penitentiary system. This is a sign of manipulation. This is a dangerous trait to have around you. You would never hire a babysitter or go into a business relationship if your business partner had Felons Claws. Now remember, you cannot judge people from a single letter with a slip of a pen. Does not mean they're psychotic. Neither do you go by something written on a blackboard or with a marking pen. It's got to be their typical handwriting, and ideally done sitting down comfortably with an unlined sheet of paper and their favorite pen or pencil. You want the conditions to mirror exactly how.
Okay.
Okay, now are you convinced?
Well, he needs to get in touch with Wikipedia and tell them to update their entry. But anyway, it's fun. It's fun to look at.
Ron, let's just have a little more fun. How about putting back up a screen of her handwriting? And let's take a look at that in light of what we've just seen.
Oh, mercy. Okay, let me see where we are here. Let's see, I need to do, just a minute, let me go here and I'm going to close the, whoops, I almost left the meeting.
Maybe it's easier to read Steve Daly's book. It's our psychobiography. Don't mess with the graphology.
He missed graphology. Maybe that's a good thing. Everybody, we're just having a little pause to have a little fun. Then we'll get back to be serious in just a moment, okay?
Let's see. Now, this is not, this is not, let me see where we are here. Let's go get a good page. Come on. I'll get there. There's a full page.
Okay, do we see anything of interest? I see these kinds of things down right here. Look at that. That's very telling.
Well, I don't see you pointing at it. Where is it on the page?
Oh, do you see my cursor?
No, I only see my own.
Okay, go up 10 lines and then to the left. The word person, see the word person there?
Are we looking in the middle of the page? Where
it says the Holy Spirit always leads the written word. The Holy Spirit is a person.
Yeah.
See how close that loop is at the bottom?
Yeah.
That's very telling.
According to you.
Okay.
David, peas don't usually have loops.
Pardon me, Bronman?
Peas don't usually have loops.
Oh, see, there you go. Now, the struck bars on the T's, those represent aggression, don't they?
Well, all the different bad stuff. Notice this. Well, folks, that's another topic. You go ahead.
Okay, let's get serious. Ron doesn't want to play around anymore. Let's get serious.
Okay.
I have one serious question. Maybe others have some too, but this is real quickly. How do we have these manuscripts, Ron? Did they make copies of them and keep the copy, or have they been rounded up from the different recipients, or how do we now have all these letters?
Well, you see, once typewriters came into common use, Ellen White did not often mail out the handwritten. The secretaries would type them up, and that would be the typescript that would be sent. I suppose that people over the years, gave them back to her or gave them back to the White Estate as they were found among people's papers, and you know, the Lucinda Hall letters all happened to be found by this young woman, and now again, some of them turn up. I don't know, each of them may have a different story. But once typewriters came into common use, Mrs. White didn't often didn't send out the typescript. We may have the typescript there at the White Estate, but what the recipient actually got was not that typescript. They got the typewritten version.
I see. But I want to say, like people like Wesley, we have all of his papers, and Luther. How do they do that? I just marvel that that happened. Okay, over to Monty.
Okay, so I have one person up, and that's George, and I have one comment, but let's go with George first.
Okay, thank you. So I have lots of time, I guess. Thank you, Ron Graybill, for the presentation, and it requires a lot of courage and backbone to do what you have been doing through the years, and I really appreciate that, because we need people like you to enlighten the church about things that are in our history. My question would be this: once the manuscripts were transcribed and published, isn't there a legal way to have the original transcripts released? Because if they were not published, that's one thing, but they were published. If they were published, isn't the White State under the obligation of revealing those originals so they can be compared to the transcripts? Because I think that their reluctance to release them may be a sign that they were badly doctored when they were transcribed, and maybe this is the problem. What do you think about this?
Well, I think the typed transcript and the handwritten original are legally two separate documents. And just because the version of the typed transcript is even online now, that's a different document, and I don't think it implies that there's any legal obligation to release the handwritten original. Now, as you can see from my presentation, samples of the handwritten material have been published here and there in various books and so on. Not a lot, but samples of them. And as I was preparing for this and going through all of my old files and looking at all the stuff I have online, I realized that given my interest in this topic way back, I have a lot of copies in online versions of Ellen White's handwriting that I need to really organize myself. But I don't think it's a legal obligation to release the handwritten material based on the fact that it's edited.
Not a legal obligation. What about a moral obligation to the church?
Well, different people will view that differently, and as you know, I'm one who, and this is why I advocate like this, but I'm one that says, my word, are we dealing here with the only prophet, the only divinely inspired prophet between John the Revelator and the end of time? Shouldn't anybody and everybody be have easy access to every scrap of information that might bear on this prophet's life, experience, teaching, and the validity of her claims and the church's claims about it, But different people have different opinions about that, and other people feel that there's plenty of stuff out there already making an intelligent decision. So you could argue he has a moral obligation, but I think there's a reason to do it.
Yeah, I find it very strange. There's a reluctance and the refusal, basically, to open up, be transparent. What is there to hide? I think that there's not much in their writings. I think that there are just my feeling that they have been doctoring those writings and changing things at will, and just to sell books and all that, and keep the church under the lid with this issue. And that's immoral. That shouldn't happen in a religious environment. That's crazy. But it seems that that's our tradition there, plagiarism and all that stuff, and nobody does anything about it. That's really bad. That's really bad. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, the comment.
Okay. Thank you, George. I don't have any other hands up, so I'm go ahead and in a way make a statement, or it's in a way a question. Ron, it seems to me that, well, first of all, let me make a statement. I certainly would not like to have to publish on the web all of my personal writings. So just from that standpoint, I can see I understand a personal reluctance, and then could also understand some reluctance of people around Ellen White. But then I haven't been, I have no claims to being a prophet for the church either. So maybe different standards apply there. But that's a lot of scrutiny, more scrutiny than I would like, but maybe justifiable. So maybe you could address that a little bit. But the other thing I'm wondering is a key issue around publishing all of these, the issue of inerrancy. The idea that if she makes a misstatement once, or backdated something once, or something like that, then all of it's null and void. It's an all or nothing thing. Otherwise, it would seem like a misstatement here, or a mischaracterization, or something like that wouldn't be a big deal. But there is this whole issue of inerrancy, and I wonder what role that plays in the reluctance to any scrutiny in your experience.
Yeah, I mean, it would, the wide state, I don't know, maybe in my presentation they'll put a little pressure on them, but the wide state is not, it doesn't have any formal request pending to do this sort of thing. Number one. Number two, this issue of errancy and inerrancy is very interesting, because what is going on right now is that Oak and Acorn is going to publish Don McAdams' study of Ellen White's chapter on John Huss that was written so long ago. And I have written an essay for that defending McAdams' contention that Ellen White made some minor historical errors, or that Wiley made some minor historical errors that Ellen White copied. But, Michael Pearson, who is teaching at Southern Adventist University, and is the son of, not Michael Pearson, pardon me, Michael Hazel, is son of Gerhard Hazel. Gerhard Hazel is the one who really attacked McAdams for suggesting that Ellen White could have made a single historical error, and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, they called on Michael Hazel to write the essay on Ellen White's use of history in the Ellen G. White Encyclopedia. And so Michael Hazel is perpetuating his father's argument that Ellen White made no historical errors in the Huss chapter on the Great Controversy. Well, McAdams' paper is going to be published finally and available for everyone. I have an essay in which I defend McAdams' arguments, and Eric Anderson has written a beautiful, masterful essay about that whole episode, and about different things that people said and different positions that people took, and all of the controversy about McAdams' book at the time it came out. And there's some wonderful things. So and the question of Ellen White and inerrancy, I think the publication of McAdams' book will be a new chapter in that dialogue about that. But we have people who who in every way they can try to claim a level of inerrancy that I think even goes beyond that of the Bible writers.
Monty, could you put Jillian Ford on your list?
Yes, I have her and I've responded to her. So thank you, Ron, for your response. And thank you, Dave. Feel free to point someone out to me because I may well miss someone, but I do have Jillian Ford and she's up.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
You know, Australians, well, I'm not Australian, I'm British, but you know that we're sort of fairly direct. And because George brought up the question of Steve Daly, I'd like to ask Ron a question about Steve. Clearly, George thinks that Steve's book is great. Now, I've done some work in history. I've got a master in history. And I didn't think he did a good job at all. I did not like the book. I read it. I went through all the footnotes. And I thought that his method of doing psychobiography and doing history was not very professional. And I didn't publicly say very much about it, but out of the blue, he sent me a message and he was damning Gilbert Valentine, who to me is one of the mildest of people that you could meet. And I just didn't respond. He was angry with Gilbert because Gilbert had made a comment on Amazon about his book. I think, I don't want to quote him as exact, but saying that he had been listed as sort of an authority who'd read the book and supported it, and this was not true. And he knew two other people who felt the same way. And because of this, I've been blocked by Steve. I didn't do anything. I think there's a strange something going on with Steve to write a book like that. I just don't. But when I listen to the historians like Jonathan Butler and others, they don't approve of what he's done, I think for the same reasons. In fact, I wrote to Jonathan Butler and he said, you and I are on the same page. But they have not come out directly and said very much. So I wondered what you thought, Ron, if you feel that you can speak publicly about it.
Well, I can speak publicly, but not very expertly. You know, I would. Well, we ought to get a collection of Steve Daly's handwriting over to Dave Larson. That might solve our problem. But naturally,
this was I just explained when I read the book, the first 50 or so pages, he was basically stating his case. He was pretty honest about how he'd done it and everything, but I thought it was more like a journalistic piece or a lawyer's case. And he had made up his mind from the beginning. So he tells you what his conclusions are going to be. I thought that biography, as psychology is a soft science anyway, full of theories that, you know, it's not considered hard science. And I think the idea of psychobiography and of diagnosing somebody after the fact, which for a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, he's a trained psychologist, should not be done. And then it's basically, well, I just didn't think he did a good job. And I thought that his footnotes, he only, from what I could see, he said that he wrote the book because of all the secret stuff that came out of the archives, but I could only find about 6 to 10 sources that actually came from that material, and some of them were doubled up. So these were my criticisms, and I tried to read the book a second time. I just couldn't read it. So I just, anyway, I'll finish. I'll mute myself.
Well, you don't have to mute yourself, but you've studied it much more diligently than I have. And, you know, I think if we were in court here, I think we would find Steve Daly as sitting at the table with the prosecuting attorneys, and I would think we would find Gil Valentine brought on as an expert witness, and I would go with Gil Valentine. But I haven't even studied Steve Daly's book with the care that you have, and so I'll take your word and Gil Valentine's word for it. But we have that spectrum within the Seventh-day Adventist Church of the people on the far right who will defend almost anything. I was looking at what's his name, Judd, the fellow at Southern. He wrote the book Ellen White Under Fire. Judd Lake, Ellen White Under Fire, and he takes up every criticism of Ellen White that has been leveled over many years. And I look at that book and I say, wait a minute, a lot of people are going to read this book and find criticisms of Ellen White that they never knew about before. I'm not sure how much good it accomplishes to try to answer all the critics, because you're giving the critics all kinds of publicity. But you know, we can look at these things anyway.
I just don't understand why. I wouldn't say that I was thorough. I didn't have enough interest to go back and really be more thorough than I've said. But I just don't see why people can't see what he's done.
Well, some can. Some can and some can't. Yeah.
He just, when people criticize him, he just comes back and picks out what he said that was good, and he completely ignores the rest. And I think when Jonathan Butler said he's also very competitive athlete, that was a very wise statement, because it's almost like he's trying to wrestle somebody to the ground. He's not using sweet reason.
Okay.
So anyway.
Thank you.
I'll be in big trouble for saying it, but I just wanted to know why the scholars aren't more forthright. Maybe they're frightened of being sued.
Well, maybe we
go ahead, Ron.
Maybe we don't want to give him any more publicity.
I thought John was pretty hard on him in Spectrum, saying that he had academic Tourette syndrome. That was pretty
I didn't
rough.
see that one. That's pretty good.
But let's linger with that book just a little bit longer. One of the issues, I think, is that I don't think it's really a biography. That is, I don't think it traces the development and changes of her thought over time. It seems to me as though what she said early on is taken as normative for what she says subsequently, maybe decades later. And I would have thought a biographical approach would have more of a continuum there. There is an edge to Steve's writing that I don't quite understand, because I've known him for many years and known him to be a man of integrity and compassion and very hardworking. I do wonder, so, something's happened here, and I don't want to psychologize Steve either. It is a troubling book. If I can just linger longer, it would be to say, Ron, the thing that bothers me the worst about Steve's book is his suggestion that she was motivated by financial interests, that she wanted to get rich and she exploited people for that purpose, and she had a mansion in Battle Creek and so forth and so on. that part of it hurts me a little bit, puzzles me. The other one is his account of how she related to her two bookmakers, let's call them. And he describes her as driving them quite distraught. And I understand that to have been a complicated relationship, but his account of her impact on their lives is really quite sobering, I think. Can you say something about those two issues? One about what you know about her financial interests, and also about her relationships with her two bookmakers.
You know, I've read so much about Ellen White, so much of her own writing, and studied and thought and talked about her so much, and so on. And you know, of course, she was concerned that she got fair return on what she had done, and so on and so forth. But the uses to which she put her money, and so on, and the ways in which she shared her resources, she never struck me as avaricious or, you know, money hungry, and so on. So that just didn't ring true to me. I think we'd have to look at that. We'd have to look at that with some more different scholars with different objectives, if we could get a balanced view of that. Now, her relationship to Fanny Bolton, the one who sort of turned against her and so on and so forth, that was a little painful. But again, she had very good relationships with most of the literary assistants that worked with. And Fanny Bolton had her own problems, and so the two of them just ended up on different pages. I'll have to look at. I haven't looked at Steve's book recently enough. I'll have to look again at those passages and see what I make of them. And
can I make another comment? Am I allowed another?
Sure, go ahead.
Comment. You know, I'm not a church member. We handed in our church membership in 2001 when we came back to Australia, because we knew it would cause a huge stir if we tried to get our membership moved from PUC. And I haven't really recovered from Glacier View, which I think was a totally unfair debacle, and they treated Des terribly. Now, but I do want to see fair play, you know, as a woman, and even as somewhat of a historian, it's impossible to go back and know exactly what went on. And I know this because we had our own organisation, Good News Unlimited. We've had our own problems, and unless you were there, you cannot really know what goes on between people. And when you have a bunch of intelligent people, you've got all sorts of egos and things. People have differences of opinion, and, you know, it's perfectly all right to have differences, but you've got to be aware when you try to do history that you're very limited looking back. And I don't see how you can make the sort of conclusions that Steve makes. So that's where I'm coming from. It's a sense of fair play. And the fact that Des was so favourable to Ellen White. I mean, he'd read all the critics, and he knew her writings encyclopedically. And Des was a very fair person. And I think we ought to be. Anyway, I'm finished. Thank you for letting me talk about it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jillian. And George is up. George.
Yes, is regarding Jill's comment. I agree. It's not that I am recommending his book. I actually didn't read it, and I told him I won't, because as I posted on the chat already, in the past 40 years ago, in the time of Glacier View and all that, I made my mind about this issue. I don't need more proofs or more proof about anything, so I won't waste my time reading the book. I read his daily postings on his Facebook, and I think that his comments reveal that he is angry and is kind of revengeful. My interest in his writings is only one, that he quotes many things that it's literal quoting, so I hope it's an honest posting. And the quotes he presents, there are many new things there that I haven't seen before, although through the years I read many things on her and about and from her, but there are some things he's revealing that are disturbing. And of course, he's building on top of that. I think that psychobiography was not a good title for that. He's a psychologist, well, I am too. And I don't think that was a very helpful term to use. It was a little bit pretentious, I would say. But so I have to be careful. But yeah, it's going to make impact of many people because he posts literally many things that she wrote that are disturbing and should be considered like, what do we do with this now? That's all my comment on this.
So Dave, did you have something? I don't have any other hands or anyone on the list, but I've got a question.
Yeah, as you can imagine, I have a number of things to throw out on the table. With respect to Steve, let me just say two things. One is that we have been hoping that he would join us on this program, but not too long back, I had an exchange with Steve, and I said, Steve, it's one thing to try to improve the church, and another thing is trying to destroy it. And I've regrettably come to the conclusion that you're trying to destroy it, not to improve it. And I really can't have that happen on our bliss. And but I also said I have and I continue to commend you and be grateful to you for the ministry you have to people who have been mangled by Adventism. And there are many people who have been mangled and hurt and wounded and so forth. And Steve has a special ministry to them. And the fact that he can articulate some of their anger, I think is pastorally helpful in many cases. And as I've said to Steve, your ministry may be the last ministry before they walk out of the door of Christianity altogether. And so I really appreciate that. And his response back to me was, no worries, that's fine. He was agreeable, he understood, and I have been friends with Steve for decades, and I think we are still friends. I'm confident of that. But on this one, I can commend him for a very helpful ministry in some ways, but in other ways, I have some reservations. So that's that. Now, if Ron, could we go back to that slide, if you can find it easily, where you have the sequence of the author, the editor, back to the author. There were, half a dozen boxes there? Would that be hard to recover? Because I think that's a very important slide that you showed, because I think it raises the question of inspiration, and it raises the question of inspiration, I think, in a fascinating way. And my question would be, where in this process did inspiration begin, and where in this process did it end?
Well, let me see if we can get to that quickly here. I'm just going to scroll this way, and it should be
there we go.
Pretty clear. And now we go to view slideshow from the current. Oh, darn. What happened there? let me stop the sharing again and start again, share screen and go here. Okay, I won't try to change it. You can see it well enough there.
Yeah. Okay, so we have handwriting editor, and then if I understood you correctly, it could loop back to the handwriter at that point, then to the typescript, then to the author's approval, selection, arrangement. And in the case of Ellen White, that selection and arrangement was a decisive matter. And then finally the publication. And I'd like to circle back to George's comment. Were her thoughts badly doctored? That's the expression I think Dr. Tisha used. Were her expressions badly doctored in that process? That's one question. But the larger question is, where does inspiration start in this process? Where does it end? And at what point should we take it as authoritative, and at what point should we not? Do you have some reflections on that?
You know, I think the inspiration process is useless unless we, the readers and the hearers, are part of the process, and the Holy Spirit is witnessing with our spirit, and the Holy Spirit is inspiring us to understand what we're reading. And I think there are very few cases where the transcription was mangled or badly distorted. I did give the example of something that was left out, and I was preparing for this. I was looking at all my old files and papers, and I have a stack here. Let me go get it. I have all this, and I don't know if I can get it on the screen here. I have all these files, and I ran across one place where Mrs. White made reference to the righteousness of Christ imputed to us by faith. And when that passage was edited, the phrase imputed to us by faith was omitted in the transcript. I think that's unfortunate. I mean, you know, we were just discussing imparted or imputed and so on and so forth. And so I think the fact that Ellen White used the word imputed should have been included in the transcript. So that transcript was imperfect. But I think, I mean, there's so much online that Ellen White wrote. But even, you know, how Dennis Fortin in his, I don't know if he actually mentioned this in his version, in his edited version of Steps to Christ, but I think he basically accepted that even Steps to Christ was a compilation. You know what I mean? So the church over the years has been, and Ellen White's assistants, Ellen White and her assistants, and the church over the years has been in the process of selecting and emphasizing what they felt was important. We're just fortunate that we can go online and see essentially almost everything that she wrote. Now, some of us think that if you want to distribute a billion copies of an Ellen White book, it certainly ought to be Steps to Christ and not the Great Controversy. But there are those who believe that the Sunday laws are just about upon us. And their view of Ellen White and her inspiration and her authority is just so different from, that's not where Ellen White inspires me. She inspires me much more in Steps to Christ than in the final chapters of the Great Controversy.
Well, that's an interesting point and an important one, that the inspiration of the text is not appropriately accepted by us or used by us unless we ourselves are being also led by the Holy Spirit. Now, with respect to this chart, I would suggest that the whole process from handwriting to reader is part of the process of inspiration, that it's not at any one point, but it's the whole series of steps that have resulted in what we now have, and we find it inspiring. Now, I don't know what the difference is between saying something's inspiring and saying something's inspired. To me, that distinction collapses. I don't have in my library, here's a section of books that are inspired, here another section of books that are not inspired. It seems that every book, insofar as it speaks truthfully, is inspired. But I understand, I think that some people would say it would be the handwriting only that's to be taken all that seriously. Do you want to comment on that at all?
Well, I wouldn't. I keep thinking of that process of our own honesty and our own openness to the Spirit's witness with our spirit is very important, and if we can be blessed by and inspired by the work of all of the people that were involved in this process. The truth, I just guess that if the truth were told, or if we knew the truth, and of course we don't, if we were able to intricately chart like this, all the steps between John the Revelator's sitting there on Patmos and penning his visions and what we read in our Bible today, we would see something just as complex, or maybe even more complex, and more stages that we even know about, and so on. So that's why we have these biblical scholars that are constantly going back to the different manuscripts and trying to find out as much they can about what God was really trying to say to us. So I want to emphasize, as you have, that in terms of our individual experience, there may not be much difference between what is inspired and what is inspiring. If it doesn't inspire us, if it doesn't convict us, if it doesn't help us, what is the use of saying that book sitting there on the shelf is an inspired book? It doesn't mean anything to us. Now, on that point, let me stop the share and show you something interesting. If you look at my picture here, you see I'm using a virtual background. And initially, I was going to prepare a virtual background that showed my bookshelf over here to my right. And I looked at that and I said, oh my goodness, I'm going to be talking about Ellen White, and I have so few Ellen White books in my bookshelf right there. Because I don't read Ellen White from books. I read it online, you know. So, but I have my good friend, whom I describe as my congenial conservative friend, Kevin Morgan. And so I said, Kevin, could you send me a picture of your bookshelf? You have a bookshelf with a lot of Ellen White books on it. And so sure enough, he did. And then I went into Photoshop and I inserted a few of my books too. But all those big volumes of Signs of the Times and the Youth Instructor and most of the actual Ellen White books that show in my virtual background are my good friend Kevin Morgan. Now he uses the online stuff as well, but he still treasures the printed books.
Well, I wish those big green ones had some value, because I inherited those and I've tried to sell them, but nobody wants to buy those big green books. I'm sad about that. Now, let's go back to a question Reinder Brunsba raised. Unless, Monty, do you have somebody on board? Apparently not.
I don't have anybody on board.
Okay. Ryder, toward the end of one of his recent sessions, said, wouldn't it be helpful if we could view Ellen White as the Methodists view John Wesley, or the Lutherans view Luther, or the Presbyterians view Calvin, or I guess the Catholics view Aquinas, though he didn't say that. But along those lines. And my response that I mentioned earlier to George is that I think that's precisely how we view Ellen White. That is, I think, and I'm wanting for your response on this, I think Ellen White is to us precisely what Wesley is to the Methodists, and Calvin to the Presbyterians, and Menno Simmons to the Mennonites, and George Fox to the Quakers. Now, the response to that is, well, they don't believe that God worked in their lives like we believe God worked in her life. And my suggestion is that that's not quite so, because Martin Luther thought that God spoke to him directly. In fact, the reason he justified crushing the Peasants' War, in which thousands of people died, I read one historian say 100,000. That seems a little steep to me, but even if it were just 1,000 people who lost their lives in that peasant uprising, and Luther endorsed it, and he said, God told me that this is what has to happen. So he had that sense of a divine commission, just like Ellen White did, and Wesley, same sort of thing. The difference, I think, is cultural. That is, Ellen White grew up in the shouting Methodist tradition, and their cultural understanding of how one experiences the presence of God is that of a very physical sort of manifestation. But for George Fox, one experiences the presence of God as a still small voice. And for Thomas Aquinas, for years and years and years, it was writing his scholarship. But then he had an ecstasy, and he said that all of his writings were like straw, which is amazing to me. So it doesn't seem to me that they claim more or they can claim less than we claim about Ellen White, but that the cultural way in which, the cultural ways, plural, in which this was manifest do differ. Now, how about taking a run at that, Ron?
Well, if you're a religion professor at Wesleyan University and you take out after John Wesley and criticize something that John Wesley said, you're not nearly as likely to be dismissed from the faculty, or the difference, it seems to me, is that these other faiths do not use their founders' writings as a basis for discipline and judgment, other than simply, scholarly. You can have a scholarly debate about John Wesley or about Martin Luther, about Martin Luther's views of the Jews, or all kinds of terrible things that Martin Luther to espouse. You can have a scholarly debate about it, but just because you're in a school that was founded by the Lutherans, you're not going to get fired if you criticize Martin Luther. Whereas if you're at Andrews University and you write a book like Steve Daly's, you're not going to be there long.
Well, can I push back? I think if you wrote a book like Steve Daly wrote about Wesley, you wouldn't be at Wesley Seminary very long at American University. I think that would be pretty venturesome for him to do that from that perch. So yeah, okay. Now, yeah, okay. I guess I'm wanting to say, okay, she has authority for us, but it's presumptive. It's not absolute. It's presumptive, and that when we disagree with her, we have to have a good reason for it. We can't just dismiss her as though she's of no account. I remember once Jerry Winslow and I went to the ordination of a Lutheran young man. He had studied with us in preparation for becoming a Lutheran minister. And at the ordination service, they asked him something like, "Are you prepared to preach the gospel in the Lutheran heritage?" And he said, yes. And so there was some expectation there that he would have some respect for Luther, even though, like you say, one can disagree with Luther a lot in a Lutheran setting. Well, anything more on that you would like to say?
No, I have to. I need to think about that and come back in several weeks and see if we have. Yeah.
Okay. Monty, is there anybody else?
There's 2 questions from me. I don't have any other hands.
Good.
And so my first question for Ron is, as he's been reading these handwritten documents, which I don't know if they're more intimate or not, but as I've known some pastors, the life of a pastor or a religious leader is often a challenging thing because of the external expectations, and it can be hard, is what I've heard. So I'm wondering, in reading these handwritten documents, if you have learned anything of real interest to you about Ellen White's spiritual walk, so just her personal experience that maybe we wouldn't get from her mainline books, and or her experience as a church leader and what that was like for her. Just curious.
Well, I haven't thought a lot about that, but now that you mentioned that sort of thing, there's a lot in her diaries and in her personal letters about her physical woes, about different physical maladies, and when she was sick this way and that. And we ought to look at those and see what kind of spiritual interpretation did she place on her physical maladies and on her illnesses from time to time. So there are things, personal things in the letters and the diaries that never make it into the published books, and there are struggles and discomforts in travel and in relationships that never make it into the published books. So we can say these things are all published; they're online now, but we don't. To me, they don't have the same impact as when I read it in her own handwriting.
Thank you. I'm going to hold off on my other and go to Gerald Winslow.
Ron, I don't know anything about graphology or how to evaluate manuscripts like this, so I had thought not to say anything. But then Dave Larson said my name and it woke me up, and I thought I'd better ask a question that is kind of on my mind. You'd like to see all of these holographs, to use the technical term, available widely. If they were much more available, what do you think would be the impact on the influence of Ellen White, or the role of Ellen White relative to the church? And I realize you don't know the answer to that, but you could have a good guess. And while you're thinking about it, let me just say that I have not lived in many different countries, but I have lived in England for a time, and in Austria, and also in Germany for a time. And I would say that Europeans generally don't pay much attention to Ellen White anyway. Oh, some do, but the ones one of the pastors said to me one day, well, look, the way we see it, Judah and Israel had their different prophets, and you could be a prophet to Israel, not to Judah, and so forth. We think Ellen White was a prophet to the United States. And we don't think that really fits very much what we're doing. I have heard from missionaries, dear friends of mine, that she doesn't really have any influence at all in some of the cultures they've worked in, partly because the books aren't very available, and also because getting the ideas into those cultures would be very difficult. So that's just, isn't the greater danger for Ellen White today that nobody pays attention, and you might do all this work to get these holographs available, and you and maybe a handful of other people would take interest in them. But that might be wrong. It's kind of fascinating just to see the handwriting there, isn't it? And you might learn, I might learn things that I wouldn't have known otherwise. I take it that's true. So back to the question then, if those were widely available and widely read by Adventists all over the world, I've already tipped my hand, I don't think that'll probably happen, but suppose it does, what do you think the impact would be on the influence of Ellen White?
Well, probably not much. I mean, you would have a Steve Daly in Argentina who would write a scathing book based on her handwritten documents, and then you would have a Michael Haslow in Germany who would find this handwriting positive proof that God was with her, and he found a graphical analysis that showed that, I'm just kidding now, but if he found a graphical analysis that found that you could tell when a person was inspired by God by the way they formed this letter or that stroke. But so I don't, it is true. Well, first of all, North American Adventism is a minority group. We have disproportionate influence and disproportionate exposure, but my word, we in terms of church membership, we are a minority group, and within North American Adventism, then you have a lot of divisions and so on, and so among some of the people with us today, among the 35 people who are with us today, some of what we'll learn if Ellen White's handwritten materials are available more widely, some people will be impressed and be helped, and some people will not. But yeah, I in the overall life of the church and in our own overall spiritual lives, I don't think wide accessibility of these documents will have a huge impact. So I guess if the White Estate is listening on Facebook, they can say, oh, well, then we don't have to worry about it.
Okay, thank you very much. It looks like Rod is up.
Rod Crocker.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with some of the reflections that you made, Ron. But I just want to rephrase or reposition Gerald's question. And if you ask the question, what difference would it make if we became aware that much of the New Testament was not inspired and could be proved that it wasn't inspired, or that some of the authors changed, and the author that we were told or thought was somebody, but a pseudonym was used, and we found out that the author wasn't who we for centuries believed who the author was. So if you ask the question, what would change? I would suggest nothing, because the power is in the use of the word. It's been established for centuries. So going into a forensic process review is not going to get you where you think you want to be. It's a 2,000-year-old bunny hole. The power is in the outcome, the user, the reader, the interpreter. There's a whole different discussion to be had here. And so we're making a lot of assumptions about pseudonyms. We use the word inspiration like it's some kind of commodity. It's transferable. Using it in the same sense that inspiration is being inspirational. It's not. Inspiration is not the same thing as authority. We use those as synonyms, but you don't have to be inspired to have authority, and you don't have to have authority to be inspired. They're different things under review. So we're very clumsy, I think, in our terminology. I think getting back to Gerald's question and your discussion, Ron, is things have, our belief, the use, the power of the Bible, the authority. I think inspiration is a pretty useless word. It's pretty meaningless. It's so complex. It takes a long time to pick it apart. It's full of assumptions. But if you use the word authority, that has been established and displayed in an outcome form for centuries. There's nothing we can do about that. It's working. It's impactful. It means a lot to a lot of people. That's the discussion we're missing.
Well, you give us a lot of food for thought there. That really needs to be considered, and all these aspects to the sources of our religious beliefs and our inspiration and how we treat them. Thank you.
Okay, Dave, I'm at the point, well, let's see, we're at 12:27. I don't have anyone up. Maybe I'll ask Ron my last question, which is, do you know if Joseph Smith's personal materials are published online? I wonder if there's a similar sort of discussion going on with the Latter-day Saints.
Oh, I think my friend John Butler would know better about that. I don't think so, but there is a masterful biography of Smith, you know. How do I get this stuff to appear on the camera? Here we go. Anyway, it's Bushman's biography of Smith. So I don't recall the accessibility of Smith's papers.
Ron?
Yes.
This is Bronwyn. I just looked it up on Google, and it says selections of the Joseph Smith papers are now available online free of charge. For the first time, all of Joseph Smith's known surviving papers, which include many of the foundational documents of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, will be accessible in one place. And that was written on June 6, 2011.
But at that point, it was a selection from those things. Is that right?
Well, it started off saying selections, and then it says, for the first time, all of Joseph Smith's known surviving papers.
Okay. Well, there's a inspirational example of how to handle the things. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Thank you, Ron, and thanks to everybody who participated in this discussion. I'd like to bring us back just quickly to Jerry Winslow's question about the impact of the worldwide church. I do think that to some extent, the future of Adventism depends upon us being able to incorporate this new information about her in a positive way. Jerry knows more about PUC than I do, even though I spent part of my childhood there and graduated from prep and graduated from the college. But they are down now to 800 students. That's not going to be sustainable. And we can look at many different reasons for that, and all of them need to be taken seriously. But I think that one reason, let's not exaggerate it, but one reason is a kind of sense that maybe Adventist education isn't worth sacrificing for. And I think it depends upon a lot of us to incorporate this new material and make it accessible in an honest but also healing way. So there's a lot at stake there. Okay, here's the benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
Okay, thanks to everyone.